Hi, it's Joe. As none of you may know, my favorite game of all time is The Binding of Isaac Rebirth. But only with all the DLC, trust me, it's necessary. While I could go on about why I love this game so much, that'll have to wait for another day. I'm still getting used to this whole video creation thing, so I want to talk about something simpler for one of the first videos I've ever made. And as the first video I'm making purely out of passion, I want to talk about the game I'm most passionate about. But to keep things more original, I decided to talk about something I assume not too many people talk about. I decided to talk about Isaac's alternate game mode, Greed Mode, or more specifically, my problem with Greed Mode in The Binding of Isaac. Let's get one thing clear right off the bat. I don't hate Greed Mode. In fact, I do think the game mode is a cool, effective spin on the fundamentals of the main game mode. However, I can't say that I exactly enjoy Greed Mode. At least, not anymore, for the simple fact that Greed Mode becomes less enjoyable the more you play it. While this can be said about any game, I find that Greed Mode suffers from this especially, for a few factors. Repetition, lack of variety, and inconsistent balance. But before I get into my explanation, allow me to give a quick rundown as to what Greed Mode's gameplay consists of, in order to give a full picture of what we're working with. Also, in case there are people who are new to The Binding of Isaac watching this vid. In The Binding of Isaac, the objective is simple. Get money, get stronger, don't die, and defeat the final boss. This is no different in Greed Mode, but instead of exploring randomly generated dungeons, you're set in preset floors of randomized contents. In the main room we spawn in, there lies a single button that, when pressed, spawns waves of enemies along with some pennies. These waves come automatically after certain intervals of time, eventually ending after 8 or 9 waves, depending on if you're playing on Greed or Greedier. You can press the button again to manually stop the waves from coming, but doing so will cause you to take a half heart of damage. After the waves of normal enemies are completed, pressing the button again will cause 2 boss waves to start, one soon after the other. After you complete those waves, you have the option of starting a bonus boss wave, which rewards you with a Devil Deal or Angel Room. To the right of the main room, there are 2 treasure rooms. In the silver treasure room, you'll find a free item that will usually be a straight stat upgrade. In the gold treasure room, you can find a much wider variety of items. Some bad, some good, and some completely useless. This room requires a key, however, which isn't exactly easy to come by in this game mode. To the left of the main room, there is a curse room. Entering or exiting the curse room will cause you to take damage, but there's a chance you might find something good inside. Above the main room, there is a special shop where you can put all the money you gained from fighting to good use. The shop will always offer a key, a red heart, a shop item, an item that will usually be a straight stat upgrade, and 2 random offers, ranging from soul hearts, bombs, another key, pills, cards, trinkets, and even items that can be found in the gold treasure room. The shop can also contain some other stuff, like chests, beggars, special machines, and pickups hiding behind obstacles, which are always a blast to find since you'll always have an excess of bombs when playing Greed Mode. There's also a super secret room hiding somewhere on the floor, but good luck guessing where it is correctly if you're excess of bombs. Once you're done with the current floor, you head to the exit room and drop to the next floor, which is pretty much the exact same as the last floor, with the only significant difference being different enemies, and you have to do this 6 times over before you reach the final boss, Ultra Greed. Once you defeat him, or his low-key unfair second phase, a donation machine will spawn for you to dump your remaining coins into, assuming it doesn't jam within the first few coins you put in. Alright, now that we're all on the same page of Greed Mode, let's talk about everything wrong with it, starting with repetition. I get that roguelikes are fundamentally repetitive, but a good roguelike will always manage to keep you interested in every run by having each run feel different from the last. This is brilliantly demonstrated in Isaac's main game mode, with every run having practically infinite possibilities. In Greed Mode, however, every run's beginning pretty much boils down to go in item room, reset if I don't want the item, don't lie, you do this too, repeat until I get something good, go in the curse room if I have health to spare, be disappointed, fight the 9 consecutive waves, buy a key, go in the other item room, decide if I want the item, fight the 2 bosses, buy an item from the shop, fight the 3rd boss, skip the double deal because I like angel rooms better, move on to the next floor, and probably repeat this process on that floor. Not on the floor after that though. The run usually becomes a little more interesting after that. And this process is the exact same for pretty much all runs, assuming you don't start off with a strong item, trinket, or anything else that would give you a strong start. So on average, a lot of your grade runs will start blending together, leaving nothing particularly interesting to remember them by, unless you get a really crazy build. You may be wondering if every grade run really has to come down to the previously mentioned process, and technically speaking, it doesn't. You can take the item from the first item room even if you don't like it. You can skip the curse room. You can buy whatever you want from the shop. You can even try the double deal, even though you'll probably be disappointed or take an offer that, although good, will leave you low enough to get one-shot by champion enemies. My process of playing greed mode is simply what I find to be most optimal. Don't get me wrong, I love choosing more fun options over something that is safer and probably more beneficial in the long run. But when it comes to greed mode, those options aren't as prevalent as they are in the main game, either because they simply aren't there, or because there aren't as many fun opportunities possible because of greed mode's somewhat strict system. Which brings me to lack of variety. I think the most prevalent issue greed mode has in terms of its variety is the map you play in. As previously mentioned, the map of every floor in greed mode is the exact same layout-wise, with the exception of the super secret room. This removes the fun engagement of being able to explore the map to your heart's content, where you can choose to focus on the bare necessities, or try to gain as much as you can while risking taking too much damage. No longer can you play the simple yet investing game of trying to find the secret room, or explore the entirety of a floor just to see if skipping that treasure room for a planetarium was worth it. Oh yeah, planetariums, secret rooms, arcades, libraries, dice rooms, bedrooms, and the challenge rooms are completely gone from greed mode. That's right, all of those additional rooms that added interesting depth and possibility to your runs are just gone, with nothing to replace them too, just completely absent. Not to mention, the all paths are gone as well. Sure, the all paths are mainly just a path to take to fight a unique final boss, but they also offered a new sense of choice and variety to the main game. Or at least, Downpour did. Because let's be honest, Downpour is the only one really worth going to. The Mirror Dimension allowing for twice as many room clear rewards, as well as an additional boss room item, if you're good enough to not die in 2 hits in the same room, is a very rewarding yet risky challenge to impose on yourself. Which is great for making your runs as hard as you want them in a fun way. And then you have Mines and Mausoleum, which are basically just trickier versions of caves and depths that cost resources to enter, with the only added benefit of having an additional choice in the treasure room. And Corpse literally only exists to fight the final boss of that chapter. Still, the all paths are conceptually a nice addition to the game that add a new layer of variety. So for them to be completely absent from greed mode is both disappointing, but also somewhat understandable. In their current state, I don't actually think that all paths would really add much to greed mode, other than a bit more optional challenge. But at the same time, I think a new layer of variety in terms of gameplay would benefit this game mode significantly, because as it stands, greed mode doesn't offer much in terms of being able to personalize your runs to your liking. That leaves me to my last gripe of this game mode, that being inconsistent balance. The way this game mode balances certain aspects of the game is wildly different compared to the main game mode, which isn't necessarily bad on its own, but the ways it does so are honestly very surprising and confusing when you look at what the game mode is deriving from. The greatest example of this inconsistency can be seen in the combat. In the main game mode, combat with enemies is, for the most part, pretty consistent. You walk in a room, enemies spawn, and you fight them. While some rooms can be trickier than others, there's still a method to all the rooms that allows you to minimize the damage you might take, assuming you're not just blasting through all the rooms with a strong build. These rooms will overall increase in difficulty the further you are in the run, as does the rest of the game, But something that is important to keep in mind is that none of these rooms will ever be too overwhelming, most of the time. That's because the combat in the main mode is spread out across most of the floor in small, individual combat experiences that you can sometimes have the choice to clear or not. All of this for the sake of manageability. Unfortunately, Grid Mode is unable to share the same manageability. In Grid Mode, all of the combat is done in the form of a wave-based gauntlet in a single room. But a problem with this system is that even if you're not finished clearing the current wave of enemies, the next wave will start on its own, often causing a snowball effect of enemies piling up on themselves until you're left with an overwhelming swarm of enemies you're expected to clear out. While this issue can maybe be seen as intentional game design, this system is inconsistent in the fact that it's only really an issue on the first floor, and sometimes the second. The only reason why this isn't as prevalent in the later floors is because by then, your build is strong enough to handle the enemies easier. Why should the early floors that are designed to be easier given your lack of items be considered harder than the later floors that are designed to be harder? Hell, this issue was even worse until only a year ago when they attempted to patch it in an update. As someone who had completed Greedier with every character before the update, trust me, it was a pain. The update didn't even fully resolve the issue, as overwhelming amounts of enemies on floor 1 still feel like a near guaranteed experience. Not to the same degree as before, but still common, leading me to believe it may be a fundamental issue with the auto-wave system. And the boss waves share this issue, but to an even greater extent. Having to fight two bosses at once is something that would pretty much never happen in the main mode, with the rare exception of Double Trouble boss fights. But even then, those fights consist of two bosses from the previous, easier chapter. Not only is having to fight the two boss waves at once common in Greed Mode, but they consist of bosses from the current chapter. But it gets worse, because the boss waves themselves are inconsistent in their own right, with some waves being either easier or harder than they realistically should be. Sometimes you'll fight a boss that you wouldn't even be able to fight on the corresponding chapter in the main mode, and sometimes the wave will be way more difficult than it has any right to be. Overall, the general experience of playing Greed Mode can be seen as a mess, with the difficulty of the run fluctuating not in a way that makes the gameplay interesting, but rather just flat out inconsistent and weird. Well, that's pretty much all of my major criticisms of Greed Mode summed up. But since I never want to end my videos on a negative note, I want to give some of my ideas on how to possibly improve Greed Mode. Keep in mind, I'm not a game designer in any aspect. I'm just a 16-year-old autist who likes this game maybe a little too much. Idea 1. More types of rooms. Something that I personally think would add a lot more variety and depth into Greed Mode would be the addition of more special rooms, such as libraries, arcades, and planetariums. Probably only those three though, since I think they would work best for this game mode. You could use those 3 spaces around the shop that never get used for anything, not even the super secret room. I think planetariums are the thing I want most out of these rooms, since it would actually encourage you to maybe skip immediately buying the key from the shop in order to save your money for something else. However, I do recognize that the inclusion of these rooms would demand a lot more coins from the player than they could afford, given how much the game already gives. That's why I think another potentially interesting improvement would be Idea 2. Increase the amount of coins from fighting. Now I know this would just make the game mode easier, but considering how unnecessarily harder the game mode already is in comparison to the main mode, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. If anything, I think more money to spend on a wider selection of options would allow for a more interesting gameplay experience that people can personalize to their liking. And hey, if that change would make the game too easy, then I think I have one last idea that could make the game harder, but also more fair. Idea 3. Rework the combat. Something that I think this game mode definitely needs is to just remove the ability for waves to start before you're finished clearing them. I think this change would make the combat much more manageable, which I think is absolutely necessary for a more fun gameplay experience. But if all of these changes were to be implemented, I think a good way to keep the game from being too easy would be to make the waves a little harder. And while this can simply be done by increasing the number of enemies or by including harder enemies, I think a more interesting change would be to add room hazards. You know, stuff like the grimaces, spike rocks, spikes, or even cobwebs. I get that these are often seen as annoying, and I kinda agree, but these are basically never used in Greed mode. So I think it would help keep the game mode's integrity to the main mode, while also being able to make the combat more engaging. Of course, I'm not calling for this change just for the sake of making the game mode harder. I would only want this to be added if the changes that I suggested before would make the game too easy. I want this game mode to be a fun, interesting twist on everything from the main mode I love so much, not a messy, difficult slog of a game mode that I would only consider playing for the sake of completion marks. Remember, I did enjoy playing Grid mode when I was still somewhat new to the game. I can recognize that it still has a good amount of respectable aspects to the gameplay that hold up the game mode in a unique and likable way, such as the focus on resource management. And even the idea of fighting a bunch of enemies in a gauntlet, despite my extensive criticism of the execution, I think is a pretty cool concept that the main mode rarely ever explores, with the only exceptions being Boss Rush and Great Gideon. But after having played this game for long enough, I've started to notice the numerous problems that lie within Greed mode that have completely stumped any further enjoyment that I can find in the mode. But maybe that's just me. This video simply reflects my personal feelings towards this game mode, so if you're still able to have fun with Greed mode, then all the power to you. Please don't let my critical view of this game mode persuade you to see it any differently. Man, I went on way longer than I anticipated when I first thought to make this video. I guess I just really like talking about Isaac, even if it's in a somewhat negative light. I'm sorry if this video came off as a little harsh. I truly think that Greed mode has a good amount of potential, and I only want to see the best from it. I also want to know what y'all at home thought of what I had to say. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think I should reconsider certain things? I actively encourage you to give your own criticism. You know, as long as it's civil and respectful. Insulting me isn't going to make me inclined to listen to what you have to say at all. And with that all being said, it's about time I ended this video. Bye bye y'all.